Hello and welcome to the Wine Enthusiast Podcast, your serving of drinks culture and the people who drive it. I'm Rachel Tepper-Paley, Digital Managing Editor here at Wine Enthusiast. Tequila is the fastest growing spirit category in the United States. In 2021, it officially surpassed whiskey in retail sales, making it the second most popular spirit in the country behind vodka. But as interest in tequila heats up, so does the conversation around additives like sweetening syrups, caramel coloring, glycerin, and oak extracts intended to make a tequila seem smoother, older, or sweeter. In a recent article for Wine Enthusiast, writer-at-large and spirits reviewer Kara Newman wrote about how this debate recently came to a dramatic head when Mexican authorities raided the home of two vocal advocates for the disclosure of additive use in tequila. Today, Kara joins us to talk about the raid and zoom out on the big picture of what it means for your next bottle of tequila. Hi, Kara. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Rachel. Glad to talk with you.
Before we get into it, let's explain what went down on March 27th. Here's what we know. That day, Mexican authorities raided the home of Grover and Scarlett Sanchagrin. They are the co-founders of Tequila Matchmaker, which launched a program now known as the Additive-free Alliance in 2020. The voluntary program essentially allows the group to inspect the distilleries of participating operations and do analyses to prove they're not using additives. The operations that pass the test get to put the Alliance's, quote, zero additives stamp on their bottles. During the raid, hundreds of pieces of equipment were confiscated from the Sanchagrin home under the accusation that they were being used for illegal distillation. Many in the spirits community feel that there's something fishy about all of this. The Additive-free Alliance has for some time been at odds with the Mexican government's Tequila Regulatory Council, also known as CRT, which recently announced a similar initiative for an additive-free verification program. And making things fishier, local reports suggest that CRT officials were present on the scene of the raid. This sounds like a startling scene and certainly not something we see every day in the spirits industry. Kara, can you tell us a little bit about why people care so much about additives in tequila in the first place and how widespread is their use?
Okay, well, it's hard to tell exactly how widespread the use is. According to the folks at Tequila Matchmaker, upwards of 70% of tequila producers are using additives in one way or another. But really, the reasons for the objections really has a lot to do with transparency. I mean, just like in food, people have allergies or they have aversions. They might want to steer clear of those additives. For example, some of the artificial sweeteners used in tequila, in addition to things like agave, I mean, they also use stevia, saccharin, aspartame, and people might just want this information disclosed so they can make their own educated decisions. But there's also a different debate as well. I mean, within the tequila world, some advocates object to the use of additives at all. And one of Grover's comments has been that using additives creates, I'm using air quotes, creates unrealistic expectations. And by that, he means that using additives can create what appears to be a canvas that might not necessarily reflect what the tequila actually is like. One of the primary uses of these additives is to create consistency in tequila, for example. So maybe one batch might be lighter, another might be darker, one might be sweeter, one might not be. And adjusting with additives can create the perception that it's just much smoother and much more consistent across the board. And then there's also one of the other objections, the final objection has to do with a process called using a diffuser. And this is a product used by larger scale industrial producers to extract raw agave juice instead of cooking whole agaves. And this process makes tequila faster and cheaper, and often much younger agave plants are used instead of allowing agave to mature a typical 7 years. And these diffusers create a much more neutral product. Some actually call it agave vodka. And then some producers will then use additives to create these flavors or textures on this otherwise neutral canvas. And that really gets a lot of people very upset, the use of diffusers.
What are your personal thoughts on tequila additives and diffusers? Is this something that you care about?
I personally don't think that using additives is necessarily a terrible, evil, nefarious thing, but it is sometimes used to cover up subpar tequila, and I do think it ought to be disclosed for food safety reasons, if not for transparency reasons. And I'm not the only one who feels that way. There's actually a community of very passionate, deep dive agave nerds. They're intense, they're vocal, and there's a lot of uproar. There's definitely a lot of pushback, especially now, against using these additives.
Do you think that the conversation around additives and tequila is at all related to, for lack of a better word, the wellness movement? Like, we're seeing people demand transparency in other parts of the food system. Is this the natural evolution of that in the drink space?
Absolutely. There's definitely been a halo effect similar to that of organic or natural. And for some reason, tequila is always described these days as cleaner. Again, I'm using air quotes, cleaner than other spirits. And I mean, that makes no sense. But the conversation around additives really flies in the face of that. And I think sometimes people forget that fermented and distilled beverages are part of the broader universe of food products and things we ingest, and they're deserving of consumer protections as well.
It's really fascinating. I'm curious to know more about the differences between the Sanchagrin's additive-free alliance and the CRT. How do they interact with one another? How are they different? What was sort of like the situation behind this big blow up at the raid?
All right, this could take a long time. I'll try to encapsulate it. I mean, the easiest way to describe the difference between these two, I mean, it's a David and Goliath situation. On one hand, you have this independent two-person organization, and on the other, you have a large, powerful government agency. That's the CRT. And it's a voluntary program, Tequila Matchmakers voluntary program. Tequila makers will hire them and grant them access to their distillery to observe their practices, and then they test at multiple points in the production process along the way. And they'll then compare those results to what you might purchase at the liquor store and just make sure that everything matches up. And it's labor-intensive, time-intensive thing to do, and they get paid for doing it, quite frankly. And my opinion is that the CRT, one of their objections is that somebody else is going in and making money, profiting off of what's going on in the tequila world by and large. And I'm sure that's raised some hackles. And, I always believe, you have to follow the money. And I really do believe that's what's going on here.
And just to be clear, it's correct. Like, the brands pay for the analysis. And
they do.
They need to renew the certification annually. So
yes.
It's potentially
an ongoing source of revenue, perhaps, yeah. And there's some pretty big brands in there too, so it's not like it's just a handful. And lots of them also will pay for the evaluation process, and then they fail, and they might come back again, or they might not.
I think that's really interesting what you said about following the money, especially considering that tequila is such a huge moneymaker these days. As we said at the top of the episode, tequila is the fastest growing spirit in the United States. And I have a suspicion that being able to claim that a tequila is additive-free is a powerful selling point. I can tell you, Kara, that as the digital managing editor of Wine Enthusiast, your story on this raid generated quite a bit of traffic, which, maybe was because of the dramatic nature of the story, but I suspect also it suggests that the notion of tequila additives is a subject matter people are really paying attention to.
I think so. I mean, again, in the spirit of follow the money, I'll tell you, just between us, between you and me and everybody listening to the podcast, since that article came out, I've been getting bombarded with pitches about additive-free tequilas. And there's clearly a commercial case to be made. I mean, one of the people I interviewed for the article was Ivy Mix. She's a bartender. She's the owner of Fiasco, a retail store in Brooklyn. And she said that additive-free tequila, she looks for additive-free when she's making her purchasing decisions for the retail shop and also for her bar, Leanda, also a tremendously influential bar also in Brooklyn. And the fact that she's out there saying, well, I'm not going to bring in these bottles unless they're additive-free, that's meaningful, and other people will follow her lead. And I do think that consumers, they'll be watching. They'll vote with their feet. They'll vote with their wallet. And I think it says something that even PR reps are sitting up and taking notice, and every company now wants to be additive-free, whether I don't know if they are or they aren't. I mean, for the moment, there really aren't any more arbiters, are there? I mean, we'll see what happens.
I think that some people would want to make the case that additive-free tequila tastes better. Do you think that's true? Do you think it's sort of besides the point because people are interested in additive-free tequila for other reasons, or is it more convoluted than that?
Here's the thing about additives in tequila. I mean, they do impact how it tastes. I attended a seminar where we tasted side by side tequilas with additives and tequilas without additives. And you see the difference. The ones with additives, there's kind of this yummy kind of cake batter flavor sometimes, or there's glycerin as this kind of slick smoothness that's very appealing. Again, I think the problem isn't that additives are being used, but that they aren't being disclosed. And a true story, one of the reviews, more than one of the reviews I've done for Wine Enthusiast, I will receive tequilas. I will taste them. I'm tasting them blind. I don't know what's in the glass until later. And then when I go to do the unveil, I don't know that there are tequila, that there are additives. It's not always listed on the bottle. Maybe it says caramel coloring. Maybe it doesn't. And more than once, I've been caught out in reviews saying, I'll rate something, let's say a 93, and it's a tequila that was, it was something I enjoyed, and I thought somebody else might enjoy. It tasted good. And I'll find out later in a fairly public, semi-embarrassing way that bottle did indeed include additives. And some of those same, deep dive agave nerds I was talking about earlier, they will, they'll call me out in forums and say, how dare you give this bottle a 93 when we know that it was made with a diffuser, that the evil word diffuser, and it was flavored with additives, and I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. And it doesn't mean that those are necessarily bad, but it means that, if I can be duped, other people can be duped.
So it's a matter of transparency, really, in your mind?
It is. I think so. I mean, I would like to know before I go out on a limb and say, hey, this is great. It would be nice to know what it is I'm saying, what it is I'm recommending and drinking.
I'm curious, how prevalent is additive use in other spirits like vodka or whiskey or whatever?
It's also pretty prevalent. Yeah, you see caramel coloring a lot. In the rum world in particular, you see a ton of caramel coloring, of additives. In the brandy world, in cognac, they talk about the use of boisé to sweeten the brandy. You pick up a bottle of vodka, sometimes you'll see glycerin listed. I mean, it's pretty prevalent. But I do think across the entire spirits industry, it ought to be disclosed. And within tequila, I mean, what we have now is this groundswell of attention in one particular spirits category because it's one of the top sellers, because there are these two entities that are kind of coming head to head, this David and Goliath situation. And it is kind of enticing to watch from the outside, though I assume it's probably not very fun to be experiencing on the inside. And again, it just all comes down to this enormous market that is now going through this very public battle. And I like to think that we'll get through this and there'll be maybe some regulations put into place in the tequila industry that other spirits industries can follow. And it would be nice to have something a little more broadly applied.
I'm just curious if you think that the way that tequila has been marketed, which is like something of an ancestral product, has anything to do with like why ire over additives has been so extreme in tequila versus other spirit categories that use additives?
That's a good question. I wonder how this would have played out if it had been the mezcal industry instead of tequila. Yeah, tequila has a lot of smaller players for sure, and a lot of growers. I mean, basically, like anywhere else across the industry, they're farmers. They're raising tequila, and they're raising agave. But I think one of the key differences between agave and other crops like corn or rye used to make whiskey is that the stakes are so much higher for agave because it takes so long to grow. It's not an annual crop. Like I said, it can take anywhere from 7 to even 10 years for agave to fully mature. And now that it's such a huge market in the US and across the world, it's getting a lot more attention. There's a lot of pressure to plant and harvest more agave more quickly. In turn, that's led to some of those diffuser tactics, because often younger agave is used to create a neutral product, which then goes through the process of having additives to make it tastier, make it seem more old, smooth, premium. I guess premium is definitely a good word to apply here. And in the end, I don't know, there's a lot of money at stake. There's a lot of livelihoods at stake. And people just want something that they can pour at home and enjoy.
Got it. Yeah. Do you think that there's an argument to be made for sort of restrictions, or at least like the need for transparency around additives as like being protective of tequila's identity?
I don't know, but I think it probably would be a good idea.
It's kind of crazy to imagine a future where you have a tequila in like every flavor of the rainbow, like you have with vodka, like cotton candy flavored tequila, sherbet flavored tequila. Like, is that, you have to ask yourself, like, is that the world we're trending to if, additive use isn't regulated or disclosed?
You see, you bring up a really good point. There is a burgeoning corner of the tequila world called Cristalino. And basically it's aged tequila that has the color filtered out, hence Cristalino. And often it's sweetened with agave. But it's usually disclosed. I mean, that is the description of the product. It's filtered. It's usually sweetened. It is what it is. It's controversial. Not everybody loves it. Not everybody has to be a tequila purist. But it's a growing section, and a lot of people really enjoy it. And as long as you know what it is you're getting, I certainly don't have any objection. It takes all types. I have a lot of respect for the people who produce tequila, and it's nice that there's such a variety within that category alone. I mean, everything from Blanco, Reposado, Añejo, Extra Añejo. I mean, that's great. But for example, I don't think that Extra Añejo should be amped up with lots of extra color and consumers not told about it. That would be deceptive. That's where I have problems. I don't have a problem with Cristalino existing or being marketed, even though lots of people may disagree. That's fine. But I like that it's yet another option. And if, as you put it, cotton candy flavored tequila becomes a reality one day, I don't think I'll be lining up to drink it, but I will gladly respect. I'll stand up for your right to enjoy it. But I want you to know what you're getting.
I think that's well said. You reached out to Grover and Scarlett Sandgren when you were reporting out this article. They said they were declining to comment on their lawyer's advice. What do you think the path forward here is?
Well, since that article came out, there hasn't been a whole lot else to say. The Sandgrens are not saying anything. Don't blame them. The CRT is not saying anything. And the only thing I'm really hearing on the ground is a lot of drum beats from press reps saying, write about our additive-free tequila. And the path forward, what happens next really depends on how much noise consumers make. I mean, similar to the organic movement or the wellness movement, if people say they value additive-free tequila, and make purchasing decisions accordingly, the tequila industry is likely to listen.
Thanks so much for sharing your insights into this, Kara. I really appreciate you being here.
Oh, no problem. It's good talking with you. Thank you.
The debate over additives in tequila adds a new dimension to the spirit's increasing popularity and what it means for mainstream drinking habits. We want to know, do you care about additives in tequila? Email us at podcast@wineenthusiast.net, and we might share your feedback on the podcast. We love hearing from you and appreciate your support. Please rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts. Remember to visit us at wineenthusiast.com for content and products that bring your love of wine to life.